Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining the Wilson Center's Maternal Health Initiative along with UNFPA for the U.S. launch of UNFPA's 2021 State of the World Population Report, titled My Body is My Own, Claiming the Right to Autonomy and Self-Determination. I'm Sarah Barnes, and I'll be your moderator today. I direct the Maternal Health Initiative, or MHI, at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm joining you today from Bern, Switzerland. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Wilson Center is a critical source of nonpartisan foreign policy research and analyses, where we work to tackle global issues through independent research, open and honest dialogue, like what we're having today, and actionable ideas. At the Maternal Health Initiative, a thematic program at the center, we focus on a multitude of global issues, including gender equity and sexual and reproductive health and rights. Our co-sponsors today, the Accessing Justice Project, is the Wilson Center's Gender-Based Violence Project, which focuses on femicide and the rule of law. Today, we're here to discuss the 2021 State of the World Population Report. And in that report, it states that the right to the autonomy of our bodies means that we have the power and agency to make choices without fear of violence or having someone else decide for us. It means the freedom to go to a doctor whenever you need one. It means making your own decisions about when or whether you want to become pregnant. It means being able to decide whether, when, or with whom to have sex. The report also details the realities for millions of people who are denied these rights and this power because of their gender, or their race, or their sex, or their sexual orientation, their age, their ability, or their geographic location. I'm really honored to be a part of this US launch and to be sitting here virtually with such an extraordinary group of panelists who can speak to the report's findings through their own experience and expertise. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our audience members for taking the time to join us. I'm really looking forward to a robust and lively discussion and ask members of our audience to please submit questions to our panel to mhi@wilsoncenter.org. I'd also like to thank UNFPA for your generous support that made this event possible. And a final thank you to my team at MHI, as well as our fabulous AV team for making these events possible. We've got a packed 90 minutes, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Representative Chrissy Houlihan to give opening remarks. Representative Houlihan is a dynamic member of the US House of Representatives. She is an Air Force veteran, engineer, entrepreneur, and educator who is continuing her career of service as the first ever woman to represent Pennsylvania's 6th District in Congress. Representative Houlihan serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and is an inspiring leader and champion for women and girls around the world. We're honored to have you here with us today. The floor is yours, Representative.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello to everyone around the world. My name is Chrissy Houlihan, and I represent Pennsylvania's 6th District in the United States Congress, and that district is just outside of the city of Philadelphia. And before I speak to the issue that is at hand, I really want to take a couple minutes to thank a few people for this very important opportunity that you've provided me. First, I also want to thank the Wilson Center Maternal Health Initiative for hosting us in this launch and for your important work and programming on issues that affect women. I also want to thank you, Klaus, and the UNFPA for shining a bright light with this report on the issue of autonomy and self-determination. Autonomy and self-determination are fundamental to gender equality, to women's rights, and to economic and social advancement of women globally. And I want to thank you also to my co-presenter, Jennifer Klein, the Executive Director of the White House Gender Policy Council, for making this issue a priority. In the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration, we are seeing an important and necessary sea change in how we talk about and work to address the issues that affect women and girls around the world. This administration's commitment to UNFPA is clear and persistent, something I know we all on this call are very deeply appreciative of. And thank you to all of the panelists who will add very valuable perspectives on this issue from around the world. It is a great pleasure to be here today to help launch the 2021 State of the World Population Report, particularly because this year's report addresses a set of issues, bodily autonomy and self-determination, that are absolutely fundamental to what we are all trying to help women achieve. Without bodily autonomy and self-determination, women and girls are subject to virginity tests, to forced marriage, to forced pregnancy, to rape and violence. Their education may end and their employment prospects may diminish, leaving them increasingly dependent on others, potentially unsafe, and without hope for a better future for them or for their own children. And this is a perpetuating cycle. The 2021 State of the World Population Report will be, I hope, a wake-up call for all of us, a painful reminder of the long road that is ahead to establish a world in which every human is equal, no matter their gender, a world where women have access to the same safety and privileges that men do. Of course, an alarming aspect of this report is the devastating impacts of COVID-19 on women's rights, health, and safety. At this very moment, record numbers of women and girls are at risk of gender-based violence and harmful practices such as early marriage. The UNFPA is a central part of the solution to women and girls' lack of bodily autonomy and self-determination around the globe. And I have partnered with the UNFPA on a variety of key issues since coming to Congress. Their mission is crucial to our collective goal of a more equitable, just, and safe planet. But it is very important that we're explicit. What does a more equitable, just, and safe planet look like? For me, it's one where every child has access to a quality education. Although children all over the world have dropped out of school due to the pandemic, girls are less likely than boys to return to their educations. It's a world where no girl should feel forced into marriage, especially at a young age. And early and child marriages limit girls' educations and economic potential, furthering the cycle of poverty and social instability. It's a society where no pregnancy is unwanted. We must equip women with education, with contraception, and gender-appropriate health care. Of course, this burden should not only fall on girls, and we need to work with boys and men to educate them about their roles and responsibilities as well in ending sexual assault and in preventing unplanned pregnancies. And it's a planet where no girl is forced to undergo female genital mutilation. This practice is often done in unsanitary conditions, and it poses very serious health risks. And it's a society where no woman falls victim to gender-based violence, a plague that has unfortunately only intensified during this global pandemic. It's a place where every woman gets a seat at the economic table. Every woman should be empowered to seek and gain meaningful employment and establish her economic independence. This world cannot be relegated to fantasy or conversation, but rather to a vision where we all must fight. It is not only what is right and what is just, but is also what is safe and what is prosperous. Studies consistently show that in regions where women are economically empowered, that there is greater community safety and longer, more durable peace. That is why the UNFPA's work is so crucial to this mission. How we can empower women to do not survive pregnancy, who are unhealthy due to lack of reproductive health care. Without UNFPA, the mission ends before it's even started. You can't be part of a society if you're dead. In Congress, I'm working to ensure that we uphold our end of the bargain by funding this vital organization. This world cannot, I have introduced legislation that urges Congress to continue funding UNFPA, and I will continue to work with my colleagues, hopefully across the aisle, to ensure that this money is duly appropriated. We can all talk about how important this work is, but as always, actions speak louder than words. And I'm committed not only to this conversation, but to continuing this work to make sure that this vision becomes a reality. I am very, very grateful, as I've mentioned, for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you so much for your time and for your commitment to equality across the globe and for your persistence for that as well. We have the opportunity here and now to make a difference. So let's seize that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. That was a great way to start our launch. We really appreciate your time. And next, we're going to move to Jennifer Klein. Jen Klein is the co-chair and executive director of the White House Gender Policy Council. She was previously the chief strategy and policy officer at Time's Up, where she led the organization's strategic planning and managed all research and policy efforts. She writes and teaches about domestic and global gender policy, including as an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University Law Center. Jen, it's an honor and privilege to have you here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I want to start off by thanking the two Sarahs, Sarah Craven, who has been a longtime friend and unstoppable advocate here in DC, and Sarah Barnes, and her colleagues at the Wilson Center's Maternal Health Initiative for inviting me for this launch today, focusing on bodily autonomy and the root causes which impact millions of women from exercising their sexual and reproductive health and rights. I'm so pleased to be here with you, Congresswoman Houlihan. Thank you for your commitment to these important issues, as well as UNFPA's Klaus Peterson, who has also been a longtime collaborator in our strategic engagement with UNFPA. As to the panelists, I know you will leave us with much food for thought, so I thank you and look forward to hearing from you about how to ensure that gender equality is a reality for every woman and girl. As we know, some 25 years ago at the International Conference on Population and Development, representatives from across the world recognized and adopted a consensus global document, the ICPD Program of Action. In doing so, they created a shared commitment to the foundational idea that advancing human rights, promoting women's equality and empowerment, and ensuring global health fundamentally contribute to sustainable development and peace. The United States recognizes that sexual and reproductive health and rights are fundamental to achieving gender equality and are an essential aspect of supporting women's empowerment and better health outcomes. Promoting reproductive rights and protecting bodily autonomy, including through voluntary access to contraceptives and the prevention of gender-based violence, are priorities for the US and our global health and humanitarian assistance. And as the Congresswoman said, this is true even more today. COVID-19 has magnified and exacerbated long-standing health and economic disparities and gender-based violence, making this work all the more important. President Biden has made his commitment clear. In his first few days in office, he issued a presidential memorandum on protecting women's health at home and abroad, in which he directed our government to take action to ensure that women can access the complete medical information necessary for their reproductive health. As part of the same presidential memorandum, he revoked the Mexico City policy, known by so many of us as the global gag rule, which had undermined longstanding US leadership in advancing gender equality globally by restricting our government's support for women's programs that prevent and respond to gender-based violence, and limiting our ability to work with local health providers and partners around the world. Earlier this month, the president also issued a proclamation recognizing Black Maternal Health Week, the first such proclamation in the United States. In it, he affirmed that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. That means that every woman, everywhere, deserves high quality, accessible, affordable, and comprehensive healthcare. This commitment is a core principle of the Biden-Harris administration and a goal we are working toward at home and abroad. And it's why President Biden directed Secretary Blinken to take the steps necessary to resume funding to the UNFPA, a universal leader in providing that healthcare and services to women and girls. Working to advance access to quality care for women and girls around the world is one of the main priorities of the White House Gender Policy Council. When President Biden issued the executive order establishing the council, which I am proud to co-chair with Julissa Reynoso, he clearly stated that advancing gender equity and equality is a matter of human rights, justice, and fairness, and that advancing gender equity and equality is also a strategic imperative that reduces poverty and promotes economic growth, increases access to education, improves health outcomes, advances political stability, and fosters democracy. The full participation of all individuals, including women and girls, across all aspects of society and in their own well-being is essential to the economic prosperity, health, and security of our nation and our world. As our Vice President stated during the Commission on the Status of Women last month, the status of women is the status of democracy, and we are committed to strengthening both. We know women will never achieve equality until they can make informed and responsible decisions about their own lives and their own bodies inside and outside the home. So let me leave you with a few key facts that will guide our work in the years to come. First, we know that there can be no sustainable development without a focus on women and girls. Second, women cannot fully participate unless their sexual and reproductive health and rights are supported. And this requires laws and policies, financing, and a focus on gender norms. And again, as the Congresswoman said, part of that is actually across all three is working with men and boys to improve their own health and to support accessibility and availability of services for women and girls. Third, women must be able to access safe, effective, and affordable modern forms of contraception as part of exercising their sexual and reproductive rights. Comprehensive family planning services are critical to ensuring better health outcomes, not just for women and girls, but for their families and communities, and by the way, for our planet. Fourth, and finally, those least likely to have access to reproductive health care are the world's poorest and most marginalized. They include those living in rural or remote areas, those displaced by humanitarian crises, those with disabilities, indigenous communities, and young people. And we must ensure that and focus on equitable access to care and services, and that will infuse our work. So yes, our commitment is to gender equity and to gender equality. And that means working on the set of issues that address the context, the whole lives of women and girls. The White House and Gender Policy Council are at the forefront of developing meaningful policies and programs, therefore, to prevent and respond to gender-based violence and to combat sexual harassment, to increase access to comprehensive health care, address health disparities, and promote sexual and reproductive rights, to increase economic security and opportunity by addressing the structural barriers to women's participation in the labor force and by decreasing wage and wealth gaps, and above all, to supporting women and girls' human rights. Our work has been laid out for us, and we'll be counting on all of you today to work in partnership with us to ensure that women and girls are truly equal and empowered in every aspect of their lives. Thanks again for inviting me to be with you today, and I look forward to today's panel.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you for bringing in the current context of the pandemic and also the Biden-Harris administration. We really appreciate you being here today with us. And you both actually really teed us off for a great conversation, and it was a great start. And now we're going to turn over to Klaus Simone Peterson to give us a bit of an overview about the recent report. Klaus Peterson is the acting director of UNFPA's Division of Communications and Strategic Partnerships and chief of the Resource Mobilization Branch. Prior to joining UNFPA, Klaus worked for the Foreign Ministry of Denmark, including as political counselor at the Mission of Denmark to the UN, as first secretary at Denmark's permanent mission to the European Union, and at Denmark's embassy to the United States. Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I would like to just give a few words of thanks initially, because it is really wonderful to be with our key American friends in Washington and elsewhere. We have had a close working relationship with the US throughout our history as UNFPA since 1969. There we have seen ups and downs. Right now we are seeing a very big change, a very positive change. And I do want to note that also in the UN context, just last week, the Commission on Population and Development reached a result for the first time in 5 years, including, of course, with the help of the US. And so our intergovernmental basis on which to work in partnership and take our agenda forward is stronger. So I'd really like to thank the White House and Jen Klein and all the work you're doing. Also, all of our congressional friends, in particular, of course, Congresswoman Houlihan. I'd also like to thank the Wilson Center, of course, for all of your work, also taking our agenda forward, and our wonderful team in DC, led by our director there, Sarah Craven. So if we quickly go to the substance of our report, I do want to highlight the report is a work of art this year. It is a fantastic document with incredible research and results, and we're joined, of course, by three of the key resource people behind the report. So if we go to the first slide, please. Just clearly, so we are all fully aware, the UNFPA, of course, is focused on rights and choices, specifically sexual and reproductive health and rights, very strongly. We publish our report every year, but this year we have really focused on taking the agenda forward a bit more than maybe we've done in the past, focusing on bodily autonomy and rights and choices. As we're talking the bodily autonomy of millions of women and girls around the world are still denied, and they're still denied to make choices about their bodies. We have so much more work to do, and we see many new areas of concern emerge, as we also saw during the COVID pandemic, which is still unfolding in many settings. Strong growth in gender-based violence, denial of rights across the board. So what does bodily autonomy actually mean? Well, it means having the power to make your own decisions about whether to have sex with a partner, to use contraception, seek healthcare without fear of violence or having someone else decide for you. Bodily autonomy also is just not simply about controlling one's body. It also encompasses the right to make decisions affecting one's life and future. And that's why we say you need the power to say yes and the right to say no. Next. So also, when you talk about rights, important to note that bodily autonomy is not a human right. It is the foundation upon which human rights are built. It is recognized implicitly and explicitly under many international rights agreements, including, as was mentioned, the ICPD, the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development, really the founding key document for UNFPA, and also the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Next. As most know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are here to help the international community track overall progress. And SDG 5 looks at gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. In order to help governments, we have, as the UN, we have defined indicator 5.6.2, and that looks at laws related to maternity care, contraception, family planning, and comprehensive sexuality education. So that's really a key piece of our report. The score that each country achieves under the indicator 5.6.2 is expressed as a percentage. As you can see, it can be as high as 100. That would be maybe in Sweden, for example, as we mentioned in the report, but it can also be a negative number. And out of the countries that have complete data, we see that only about 80% have laws supporting sexual health and well-being. Only 75% legally ensure full equal access to contraception, and only about 56% have laws and policies supporting comprehensive sexuality education. Next. So what do we need to do? We essentially have three key messages that we really bring out of the report. First of all, we must end control. Women around the world, again, as I said, are denied the fundamental right to make decisions over their bodies and futures and are controlled by men. This must change. Next. Secondly, we have to guarantee access. We have to guarantee unbiased access to sexual and reproductive health care for all, with zero tolerance for discrimination and violence. And finally, next, we need to empower women and girls. At UNFPA, we know that communities and countries flourish only when all women are empowered to make their own informed decisions about their bodies and their lives. We need to empower women to govern their own bodies by providing full range of reproductive health services, supporting education and information about bodies and rights. And as men, we also need to become champions of gender equality, take equal responsibility for parenting, and learn to communicate about sexual and reproductive health and rights. I thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Klaus. That was a great overview of the report. It really is fabulous. And as I was saying earlier in one of our calls, there's just so many things to discuss. And I think you gave a great overview of the conversation. So thank you very much. And I know you're going to stay with us as we move on to the panel conversation. So please chime in if you have other things to add. So now, before I move it over to our panelists, I just want to remind everyone who's watching in the audience to please submit questions to mhi@wilsoncenter.org. If you send in those questions, then we will ask our panelists as many as we can get to in the time that we have. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter @Wilson_MHI by using the hashtags MHDialogue and My Body Is My Own. Okay, so now we're moving on to our discussion today. And I have three excellent panelists who are joining us from all over. We will start with Lady Landano, who is here with us from Washington, DC. Lady is the bilingual program manager of Chat, Text, and Chatea Textea at Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She has experience leveraging digital tools to support young people to access the resources they need. She is currently pursuing her master's in Latin America Hemispheric Studies with a focus on gender and global public health. Lady, can you just raise your hand so the audience knows who you are? There she is. Okay, great. And next we have Dr. Jay Silverman, who is here from California, calling in very, very early this morning. We really appreciate it, Jay. Jay is a leading global health researcher on understanding and preventing gender-based violence against women and girls, including intimate partner violence, sexual violence, sex trafficking, and reproductive coercion, including development and testing of community and health service-based interventions to reduce gender-based violence and improve sexual, reproductive, maternal, and child health. He has led multiple major government, foundation, and UN-funded projects, published over 220 peer-reviewed studies, and co-authored an award-winning practitioner guidebook on these issues. And Jay is there, and I see that you can actually see their names. There he is. Great, thank you. And finally, calling today from Egypt is Dr. Nahid Dubia. Nahid is an expert and activist in sexual reproductive health and rights. She is the first woman surgeon in Sudan. She worked at the Population Council in New York as a technical advisor to the World Health Organization and several UN agencies, and as an adjunct professor at Columbia School of Public Health. She is most known for her work to stop female genital mutilation and cutting from an African feminist perspective. She currently divides her time between London and Khartoum, where she is the director of the Institute for Republic Health and Rights in Sudan. Welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for being here today. So to start things off, I'd love for each of you to tell us a little bit about yourselves and about your work and how bodily autonomy, self-determination, and other concepts detailed in this report apply to you in your work. We'll start with you, Lady.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for welcoming me into this space. I'm humbled to be on this panel with Dr. Dubia and Dr. Silverman. I would also like to thank the Wilson Center and the UNFPA for being a driving force today and leading such an important discussion. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the program manager for Chat, Text, and Chatea Textea at Planned Parenthood. Like many of my colleagues and peers, I really began my work in sexual violence advocacy, which really rooted my reproductive justice framework and where I am today and the work that we're doing on Chat, Text. So Chat, Text is a digital tool that exists to provide people, young people in particular, with the information and resources that they need in regards to their sexual health. Our protocol is an evidence-informed intervention that ensures that we are answering immediate concerns, informing, educating, and really empowering people to seek the care that they deserve. It is rooted on the magic of behavioral and communication science to really connect people to care. At its core, it's centered around meeting people where they are and really ensuring that they have the information that they need to make decisions about their body and their reproductive choices. On Chat, Text, and Chatea Textea, we see a range of people coming to us with a range of topics. They're talking to us about birth control, emergency contraception, abortion, pregnancy, STIs, and other related health sex topics. due to the nature of what our educators are equipped to answer and how those topics intersect, we also see people come to us that are concerned about their safety, who have experience in intimate partner violence or sexual violence, and we want to ensure that they receive accurate information and they're connected to the appropriate resources. While this tool has been available for 10 years, in the last year during the global pandemic, it was highlighted how critical access to reproductive health care information is. We continue to be available and to be able to connect people to care. With so many uncertainties across the globe, people can count on Chat Tax and Planned Parenthood to be there to answer their questions around their sexual health in a space free of judgment and stigma. My experience as a sexual violence advocate and as an educator, a space, whether it's digital or physical, created for people to seek more information, to be validated, to be connected to resources, it's invaluable to helping them feel in control and like they have agency and autonomy over their bodies and their choices. However, as the report points out, I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that although tools such as Chat Tax and Chat Ethics, they are one piece of the puzzle, we need to recognize how these tools fit on a larger scale. We need to call out the structures and institutions that exist to maintain power structures that really hinders people's ability to truly feel empowered and feel like they have agency over their body and their reproductive choices. So tools that are centered around accessibility and are people-centered are at the core of the work that we do and advocate for here on Chat Tax and Chat Ethics.
Thank you so much, Lady. We are definitely going to come back with more questions for you on your work, but it sounds really, really interesting and very valuable. And I'm excited to hear about innovative ways to reach young people. So thank you very much. We'll turn it over to you, Jay. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks so much to UNFPA for authoring this really critical landmark report. I'm honored to be here this morning with everybody. I'm a professor of medicine and global public health at the University of California, San Diego, and I'm co-founder of our Center on Gender Equity in Health. It works here in the US and globally to work to develop solutions that improve the autonomy of women and girls everywhere. Improve solutions that are sustainable and scalable and can reach the broadest populations possible. As repeatedly stated throughout this landmark report, the right to bodily autonomy is at the very center of the struggle for gender equality, although much progress has been made in recent decades regarding the legal rights of women and girls to be free from violence and to be treated not as the property of their fathers and husband. However, the historical entitlement of men to control girls' and women's bodies, specifically regarding, as been stated, whether, when, and how often to get pregnant, persists globally, not only in low and middle income countries, but in many high income countries. One way that we certainly focus a great deal on in our center is looking at issues of reproductive coercion, which is an important way in which women and girls are been deprived of bodily autonomy through behaviors enacted by male partners, sometimes other members of families and communities, that are meant to block access to and use of contraceptive methods by women and girls who want to use them. Common ways that this occurs is through simple telling of women and girls that they are not permitted to use contraception, restricting mobility such that they cannot visit a clinic or other place where they might access contraception, threats by male partners and others that they will be left and their partners will have children with another woman if they do not get pregnant, and even destroying and breaking methods of contraception that they manage to get access to. Unfortunately, this experience is quite a common one here in our studies across the US. 1 in 4 women and girls going to a health facility to seek contraception report experiencing reproductive coercion. In Kenya, recent work there, 40% of women and girls seeking contraceptive methods in clinics report experiencing these forms of coercion. Unsurprisingly, reproductive coercion is consistently and strongly related to unintended pregnancy, and it's also often accompanied by other forms of gender-based violence and coercion, as all of these behaviors stem from the same pervasive, although rarely examined, entitlement to control over the lives and bodies of women and girls. What is surprising and disturbing is how broadly held these beliefs and assumptions continue to be, even among those of us who actively work to promote the health of women and girls around the globe. For example, in every country where my colleagues and I speak about reproductive coercion to health officials or other authorities involved in working to improve access to contraception, people express initial disbelief that this is a prevalent concern, and some state that the belief that really women are the ones who are controlling men by looking to get pregnant. When we talk about supporting women's rights to use contraception in the face of this coercion, including supporting them to find ways of using contraception without the knowledge of coercive male partners, the initial response is often that it would be unethical to do so because we would be assisting women to lie to their husbands. Underlying these responses are deeply held, unexamined assumptions that protecting men from women's lies and manipulation, as well as a man's right to know whether a woman is doing something against his will, that these are to be prioritized over the rights of women and girls to bodily autonomy. Even when we do not operate under these assumptions and are clear about the importance of women and girls' right to bodily autonomy, we can still unintentionally undermine these critical rights. One example of how this can occur is through programs focused on male involvement in reproductive and maternal health. Of course, such involvement can be key, and it is a key means to reaching gender equality, but not, of course, if that involvement reduces a woman's ability to control her body. For example, women experiencing reproductive coercion, for them, male involvement can actually reduce their control, can make it more difficult for them to access and use contraception. As with all programs and policies, the only way to ensure that we do not undermine this basic right is to ensure that there's protected and safe space for the voices and choices of women. They must have the opportunity to decide without coercion from male partners, family, community, or the health system, whether they want to use contraception, what they would like to use, and how they would like to use it. The good news is that countless health providers and others working with women around the world have long recognized that reproductive coercion is a threat to the health and rights of women. And also, very importantly, there are now tools and programs that have been shown to effectively help health providers around the globe to support women to overcome this coercion and to regain their bodily autonomy. In fact, our center is currently partnering with the Kenyan Ministry of Health to scale such a program across their national health system. Of course, the source for these innovations has been women in communities around the world who have always been working to help each other cope and resist this and other forms of violence and coercion. Just in sum, this report is absolutely critical in really pushing all of us across all sectors and geographies to make sure that we recognize the assumptions, practices, norms, and behaviors, including those of our own making, that may pose barriers to women's bodily autonomy, and to redouble our efforts to promote and ensure this basic human right. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Jay. You gave us a lot to unpack. We're going to have quite a robust discussion. I really appreciate all your commentary. And now we turn to Naheed. Naheed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of the US launch and to the Wilson Center. But I first and foremost want to thank Unfpa for giving me the opportunity to be part of this report. As you will see from the report, I was the external advisor in its preparation. And the reason I'm saying this special thanks is because I really believe it's a historical document. And to me personally, it's become a landmark in my own life, seeing that we can now talk about bodily autonomy. As Sarah said in the introduction, I am Sudanese American, Sudanese British, all three, but I'm really from Sudan and I still work in Sudan. I dedicate most of my work at this time of my life to Sudan because it's a country which is an Arabic-speaking African country, majority Muslim, and we have lived for 30 years under quite a heavy military conservative dictatorship. But women stood up and changed all that in a wonderful rebellion that the youth led, which I hope some of you have seen on CNN or otherwise. The reason I'm happy to be part of this is I do believe that talking about body autonomy is what the goal that we've been searching for and find. I'm not saying it's the end of the road, but it's a big landmark for us. Ever since ICPD, as others have said, sexual reproductive health and rights has become the language, the agenda. And it's a wonderful agenda, but it's a very lengthy, kind of protracted sexual reproductive health and rights. I find it very difficult to explain to many people, educated or less educated, what does all of these 4 words mean. But I assure you that having worked not only in the Middle East and Africa, but around the world, both in higher income and low income and middle income countries, bodily autonomy is something people can grasp. It's profound, it's deep, but it's also very simple and very intuitive. People know that they should and must have their autonomy if they were given a chance. Let me share with you some of the examples of what I hear and women say to me every day and what I witness sometimes from the lives of girls and women all around me. For example, a brilliant young dentist who came to me crying at her wits' ends because all she wants to do is finish her master's degree and her brother won't allow her because it's time for her to get married. And if she tries to reason with him, he will just slap her around. And there is nothing she can do about it. She cannot negotiate. She cannot go to a legal, any kind of legal body to protect her. And of course, culturally, which is the most important thing that I would like to talk about later, it's not yet seen as something unusual for her brother to control her. Another example, which links to what Jay said, is a school teacher, a primary school teacher who I actually met in hospital, who wanted to stop having children beyond 3 children. She just wanted to give her children a very high quality parenting. But her husband refused and wouldn't let her have contraception and at the threat of, as Jay said, of divorcing her. So in her 5th pregnancy, she developed hypertension. And unfortunately, in delivering her 6th child, she actually died. It can reach that bad. Another example, which may seem a bit odd from where I'm coming from, but there are many young men who are in rural Sudan, not just even in the city, who happen to love other boys. They gather in their own coffee kind of circles. They, create a community for themselves, but they are often raided, beaten by the police, put in prison. And this is a form where governments and authorities say they don't own their bodies. So we have different ways of who actually decides on somebody's body. I think the interesting thing about this report, maybe some of the issues, as Klaus said, we do have new data, which is 5.6.1 and 5.6.2 about decision making, which I would like people to focus on. Although it only covers a limited number of countries, it's a new kind of data that hasn't been gathered before. So it still needs to be popularized. It's about how women make decisions about their sexual behavior or about their contraceptive behavior. But many of the other issues that are mentioned in the report are the issues we've been dealing with for many decades now: female genital mutilation, child marriage and forced marriage, virginity testing, so on, gender-based violence. But I think what's different is to look at them from the lens of bodily autonomy. I think that's the deal. It's not just a harmful traditional practice that FGM is. It's a violation of a bodily autonomy. Nobody owns that child's, according to the convention, nobody owns that child, not their parents, not their guardian, nobody. So nobody has the right to violate that bodily autonomy. Same for virginity testing. Virginity testing means that the government and the doctors and the health systems have the right to pin a woman down and check whether she's a virgin or not, whether because her parents ask or because there is a legal case for her or against her, which is exactly what we see every day in my work. So I think bodily autonomy to me is a concept that almost everybody can understand. You can be rich, you can be poor, you can be highly educated, you can be illiterate, you can be a woman and a man from any ethnic group, belong to any religious group or religious belief, and you can understand your right to bodily autonomy. I think that's what makes it so compelling. Yet, as the report says, and as Klaus said, to this day, in the majority of countries, maybe even, let's say, in all countries, there is some degree of lack of autonomy, lack of ownership of women and minorities, be they disabled minorities, sexual minorities, indigenous people, who do not have the right to make decisions about their bodies. And this situation cannot continue. I think as of today and tomorrow, we have to start saying, no, we cannot justify it by any means, whether it be cultural, be religious, be ethnic commonalities or whatever. So my real question for policymakers, for legal bodies within every country as well as internationally, for funders like the US, can we now say, enough, we cannot have one person own another person's body? To me, that idea was supposed to have been banned in the 19th century. Nobody owns somebody else. Yet today, we are starting the third decade of the 21st century, and there are millions of women and girls and others whose bodies and decisions are owned by somebody else. I had thought that the S word has been banned, but it seems that when it comes to gender and sex, it hasn't been banned. So I want to say again, thank you to Unfpa for having the daring to actually put body autonomy at the center of our concerns, or at least the lens from which we talk. And I hope that we'll continue. This is just the start of a new conversation. It's old, but it's also new. And I do hope that the conversation, as I said earlier, should not be restricted just to policymakers or legal bodies, but to communities and cultures. I don't believe that there is a community or a culture or religion or any kind of group who cannot openly start talking about the right of every individual to their bodily autonomy. There will be resistance. There will be resistance everywhere. In the West, as well as in the South and the North, there will be resistance. But like all advanced concepts, if we just hold on to it and keep insisting that this is a fundamental right to every human being, no matter who they are, I hope and I think eventually we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions here coming from the three of your commentary and the presentation from Klaus earlier. I also want to remind you of a few questions coming in from the audience. A final reminder for those watching this event, you can submit questions to the panel at mhi@wilsoncenter.org. But we've got a little bit of time to sit and talk, just the group of us now. And one of the things, even coming off what you were just talking about, Naheed, but it seems that while we are talking about bodily autonomy, which is a new concept for some, we are still mentioning issues that have been addressed before. And so what I'd like to ask the panel is really, what's new about this report? What did you find that was new or surprising, or some other innovative ways that you've seen either in this report or outside this report in your own experience to help move the needle for women and girls towards this ability of having bodily autonomy? And you can unmute when you want to jump in and say something. Go ahead, Naheed.
As I said before, part of what is new is the data itself. We have two sets of data that are new. And as I said, unfortunately, they don't cover the world. So we have to push for that data to be gathered almost anywhere. And the second to me is, it's just a concept. If we can get everybody to look through that lens, so we can no longer justify FGM just for health reasons. You know, oh, it's horrible for health reasons, or, you know, it's a harmful traditional practices. Maybe if we just tell people it's not very good for you. I think we have to move from that. Nobody should be virginity tested because it is her right and it is her body. So I think that's the emphasis. It's not a do-gooder. It's a much more a personal right.
Great, thank you. Jay or Lady? Klaus? Oh, Klaus, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Just quickly, Sarah, I wanted just to note that as Dr. Tubia mentioned, we have a lot of new research, right? And that's very important that we can really explain what is happening around access to rights. I also want to note that it has been an eye-opener also to much of the international community, including this country, where you see the impact of COVID and how that pushes back the rights of women very significantly across the board. And even in this country, where we've seen what the pandemic has meant in economic terms, and women are hit disproportionately. That's very, very clear. We also want to talk about bodily autonomy because this year we are celebrating Beijing plus 25, and we have a very big international events around what's called the Generation Equality Forum, where we're taking these conversations even further. UNFPA is part of a big coalition with many member states, with the World Bank, to really also, again, look at bodily autonomy and SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and what more we need to do now 25 years after Beijing. This follows on in 2019, we celebrated the 25 years of Cairo at the Nairobi Summit, where we also really tried to push the agenda and got a significant momentum, both politically and financially. As I mentioned earlier, the fact that we got an outcome of the Commission on Population Development only last week is hopefully a sign that the political momentum is moving a little bit in the right direction. We're used to ups and downs and going back and forth. That's the nature of the game in sort of an intergovernmental setting if you're the UN, but we see some hopeful signs right now, and we hope this report is contributing in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thanks, Klaus. Lady, go ahead.
Yeah, I think echoing Dr. Tubia and Klaus, I think the report highlights the amount of work that still needs to be done. And while we're still having conversations around issues that have been discussed before, we're using explicit language in this report around bodily autonomy, which I think is new and I think it's fresh. Language that maybe we didn't have access to maybe 5 to 10 years ago. I'm thinking of stealthing in particular, which is called out in the report, that still hasn't been recognized at a countrywide level in the United States as a form of sexual violence, let alone on a global level. I think it highlights the gaps in the work that needs to be done. And while we may not need to reinvent the wheel, we can continue to innovate and really optimize what we know to center those that are most impacted. And I think you called it out earlier, Sarah, thinking about innovative ways where we can use interventions to really reach communities and ensure that they have access to the information and tools that they need to really achieve bodily autonomy.
Thank you. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, just to build on what Dr. Tibia also said, the lens, the very clear lens of bodily autonomy is really, the focus, again, not only in low and middle income countries, but in high income countries, including the US, of the continuing fight to allow women and girls to control their bodies, not just about becoming pregnant, but decisions about pregnancy. And this lens is really, it's unifying and it's clear. And I think, yeah, it is a great breakthrough, I think, to really refocus our efforts as national level and global community to push through those remaining steps to really guarantee all women and girls this very basic fundamental right.
Great, thank you. Another thing a few of you have already kind of touched on, but it's just that the idea that issues of bodily autonomy also greatly impact the LGBTQI plus community. So how can we be inclusive of all identities when discussing issues of gender-based violence and bodily autonomy? And how does inclusive language play into this? Lady, you mentioned language as an important part of your work. Do you want to start us off on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question. And I think it starts with allowing the LGBTQI plus community to really take the lead in this work and recognize that they're the experts in the area, they're the scholars, they're the advocates, and they have been doing this work for a really long time. So we honor them by ensuring that they're part of the work, not only a topic of the conversation or part of the report. They're represented across all levels of the process and mirror the language that they've identified is representative of their own experiences. And I think really that's at the core. And I know in the report, I, as you mentioned, I talk about language being really important and critical. And I'm thinking of my perspective from a sexual violence advocate or a reproductive justice advocate. Our research and reports and literature need to reflect that. A lot of the research and data and investment is still centered around the binary and the cis hetero people and excludes a range of gender identities and LGBTQI plus experiences. And I think that needs to change to ensure that we're accurately representing them in this work, and also that they're represented in the solutions moving forward. So I think language is critical, and that's how we can shift the needle to really truly be inclusive in a meaningful and impactful way, not just using inclusive as a buzzword.
I'd like to say something quickly here. Absolutely, I think bodily autonomy was able to, for us to put in the report some of the issues affecting LGBTQI. I think it's actually have about 5 pieces within the report that actually addresses that. And as Lady said, I think what it says that not, of course, the LGBTQ individuals, but also everybody starts with their understanding of their right to the body. We don't just empower them. They have to know, they will know that they have that right and speak for themselves, whoever they are. A couple of other people and some issues that were raised in the report, because it centers around person's definition of their own autonomy, are 2 issues that we haven't resolved completely, and I don't think the UN has either any, final, stands on, which is surrogacy and sex workers. That also, when you discuss surrogacy and sex work, from the concept of a body autonomy or decision making by the person. I'm not talking about forced surrogacy or forced sex work, but the idea that a person has the right to make decisions then follows with that lots of other rights, including access to healthcare and support and things like that, without judgment or criminalization, regardless of our views on it. So, I mean, even though the views may be, diverse, and we haven't conclusively said either way, but it is everybody's right to have that autonomy.
Sarah, if I can add, there was a vivid example before that Dr. Tubia mentioned from Sudan about LGBTQI, as something that we see in all cultures. UNFPA and UN overall, we want rights for everyone. Rights are not restricted, but we are also, I would say, probably a little bit clearer in our report on these topics than sometimes in the past. And here we are joined, I think, increasingly by other parts of the UN, including the Human Rights Commissioner, that we need to think about LGBTQI and how we bring that into the conversation. Another really marginalized group, I have to say, that we're bringing in more is also people with disabilities. They have been forgotten overall by everyone over centuries, and it is time to bring them back in, as we also tried at the Nairobi Summit. Two solutions that we need on both groups, really, I think, is to ensure the legislation. I mean, as the report shows, we don't have strong enough legislation everywhere, and legislation also needs to evolve. I'm from Denmark. When we look at our legislation, it constantly needs to evolve. It's not bad to start with, but it just needs to get better. Secondly, we work very closely with women's movements and youth movements and civil society overall. And that is just critical to ensure that you actually understand what is happening, what are the concerns, and how can we find solutions together. So yes, the UN is intergovernmental, but we bring in civil society very robustly, parliamentarians, academias, and so forth. Otherwise, you just will not understand the world and know how to find solutions. Thank you.
And if I just one last comment here, because Lady's absolutely right, of course. I mean, we are and have been historically stuck in the binary. In one way that we, if we contribute to really and create invisibility for non-binary and gender minorities by not allowing people to identify in the data, so that we have we don't have adequate information, and what we do have, again, we have really it's quite limited, and in most all of the global data that we have around sexual and reproductive health and rights, we don't allow people the opportunity to actually identify as who they are in terms of gender and sex. So it's really critical that that moves forward really quickly, so that we actually can have a discussion based on the realities of people across the globe.
Thank you. Great. And you've all kind of touched a little bit, but we're also getting questions in on the same topic. So I just want to bring it up again if people want to speak a little bit more. The report really mentions the importance of making comprehensive sexuality education available to all people, including men and boys, in order to bridge knowledge gaps so that they are not a barrier to women's ability to make autonomous decisions. And I think Jay really discussed this at length in his opening remarks. I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts on this? And what are other ways and at other points in men and boys' lives where there could be interventions and there could be programs to intervene to make this a positive impact? kind of building off what some of you've already said, but really where is the space in your opinions, in your work, things that you've experienced already, and where is the space for men and boys involvement? I don't think we have ever had an event at the Maternal Health Initiative where someone from the audience did not ask about the space for men and boys. So I do think, I want to ask the question a little bit again and see what people's thoughts are on that. Who'd like to start? Jay, go ahead.
I'm happy to start. It's as I think Klaus said this, one, of course, there need to be many, many more men at these tables. There's no need today, but often that's not the case. And this not be seen as sort of an issue solely for women and girls. I think, male and involvement. And it's, to me, the focus, the powerful focus, right, needs to be on the norms, the social norms that drive the sort of continued expectancies and entitlements that I'm talking about in terms of control of the bodies of women and girls. And, that requires many things. Requires that these things are openly discussed by leaders of all kinds, that there are sanctions for people who continue to, I guess, violate norms of equality, but there's recognition and support for individuals who break existing norms. Now I realize that's all very vague, but really programming and policies that focus on the change in social norms. We can introduce all sorts of wonderful programs and technologies and legalities, but if we don't change the norms, they tend not to mean anything. People will still act on, the frameworks and again, what they feel is expected of them and what is acceptable. So it's a protracted and difficult effort, but these need to be the things that I think we very much focus on for now and for a long time.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Anyone else want to jump in there? Klaus, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, of course, this is a key part of UNFPA's work, right? So we have to work at several levels. So again, as I mentioned before, you need to have the right legislation, and then you need to enforce it, right? That's key. But in addition, you have to make sure that family planning is available and that there is information. I mean, those two things have to happen in tandem, as we also say in the report. You can talk about the information, but if you're not allowed the access, then it doesn't work, and vice versa. So this is where UNFPA has its very big supplies program, where we combine CSE, sexuality, comprehensive sexuality education, and access to the family planning commodities. On top of that, we have very specific approaches in all different country settings. For example, we're very proud of, in West Africa, in many places, we have what's called the École de Mari, the husband school, where you talk to men separately, and they understand that actually access to services, information is good for the whole family. It protects your family. A lot of cases, we also have to recognize that while some of the cultural practices are not what we would want to see today, a lot of the time they have evolved as a way to maybe protect your society, protect your family members in ways that are not the way that we would approach it today. But you have to evolve with that and have the conversation around culture and have a joint understanding that this is a good thing for the whole family, for men and women and everyone, all as one. I'm sure Dr. Tubia may also have an interesting perspective.
Yes, I actually, of course, we have to change the way men see themselves, their toxic sexuality, as some people call it. as well as their understanding of what they have been brought up as social norms. And I do agree with Jay, it's not just about having programs and projects for men or boys. Maybe that's sometimes necessary, but also it's about talking about how do you actually start conversations to change social norms. And here I want to emphasize just the everyday cultural investment that we should be doing. I know it's not always easy, and it's difficult for donors or technical agencies like the UN or international donors like the US or USAID. But I think it's necessary if it's done with sensitivity and thoughtfulness. I am sitting here in Egypt. It is Ramadan, if you know, the months of fasting. It's the biggest month where there is unbelievable amount of television soaps that go on that everybody watches. If you look at these, the stories, the gender bias is so strong today as if we're still in the 1950s or 60s. No amount of legislation is going to change that. What we need to do is, number one, invest in school curriculums that actually emphasize gender equality. I think that's important, and that can be done with some technical negotiation as well as, you know, supportive, let's call it supportive funding towards these positive images, as well as actually finding ways to impact, maybe even by taking examples from some countries that might have cultural similarities and show them to another, because a lot of the time people have no idea, they don't have a sense of what is needed. So there is a lot of support that can be done there. But I think we need to get at the cultural daily dialogue if we can, and invest in that besides any legislations or policies. Plus, as I said earlier, school curriculums are very important.
I agree. Go ahead, lady.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Dr. Tubia mentioned. This question in particular made me think of frameworks in sexual violence prevention work, where we can't even begin to tackle comprehensive sex ed or consent or any of those topics until we're addressing toxic masculinity, stereotypes, generational trauma, and how that impacts men and boys in particular. Once we've engaged them, once we've created a space for them to feel heard, supported, and validated, then can we begin to talk about the other issues that also impact their livelihoods and their well-being. And when I think about a high quality comprehensive sex ed, I think it's important and necessary, and it needs to include information on topics related to sex and sexuality, exploring values, beliefs around those topics, and it's centered around really gaining skills that are needed to navigate different relationships and manage your own sexual health and well-being, and that shouldn't be exclusionary of any gender.
Great, thank you. Thank you, that's a really good point. And in all of your talking, I've scratched down here about 12 more questions, but time is running short and I wanted to move to the questions coming in from our audience. So I will give you one and people can jump in and then I'll go through some of the others. But the first question is, can you speak to how preventing obstetric fistula and maternal deaths relates to the issue of bodily autonomy and ensuring gender equality? What more can be done to prevent these issues through this lens that we're talking about today? It's a hard one. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Obstetric fistula, I think a lot of it happens because of early marriage. There is a very strong correlation between child marriage before the body has completely adapted and evolved to receive a pregnancy. So that's one way of looking at it. If we work on early marriage, you're helping with fistula. The other one would be when it happens, if it happens, which partly, of course, it's lack of services. So when you have obstructed labor, there isn't a good service for cesarean section. All the calls for making services available to everybody, that's just a right, just may not relate directly to autonomy. But once a woman has the fistula, I think giving her support to feel less rejected, to feel less shame, and also, of course, to give her as quickly as possible the possibility of having fistula repair, because smelling of urine and feces is not something that is conducive to any bodily, anything but body shame. So obviously treatment is very important, but also even emotional support to say you are not a reject, you are not the person who is to blame for this.
If I can just quickly jump in, Sarah, our analysis is very similar to Dr. Tubia's, and the programs that we do have addressing fistula in particular, I mean, they also look at the specific problem with young women getting pregnant before their bodies are ready. So again, this goes back to, you know, having children only when you're ready as a key component. Our programs involve, of course, repairing the fistula and then also reintegrating, exactly as was mentioned, those who have suffered for fistula into the society through new skills. So I've visited myself lots of our programs where you have a repair and then you learn a new skill. It can be training as a seamstress or a hairdresser or a skill that can help reintegrate you into society, because a lot of the time, indeed, these women are completely ostracized. So they need a way back in as a respected member of their society and somebody who can contribute also to the well-being of the family. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the next question unless anyone else wants to jump in there. No? Okay, great. The next question from our audience is, vasectomies are an effective way to prevent pregnancy and are safer, cheaper, simpler, and less invasive than tubal ligations. Yet among sterilization procedures, tubal ligations are much more common than vasectomies. What does this say about who carries the burden of family planning and what could be done to share that burden more equitably? Who wants to jump in? Jay, go for it.
I'll jump in very quickly. I mean, I think it's emblematic, certainly, of everything that we've spoken about, and that men have a different right to their own bodies and reproduction than women and girls do, and that you know, the sense that a man's ability to continue to have children is something that must be protected, and you know, again, in a way that really that is not there for women and girls. It's also, of course, part of it is the responsibility of women and girls to manage family reproduction. You know, that their bodies will are responsible for, you know, for bearing these needs. So you know, and yeah, it's very much, unfortunately, what you said is absolutely right. It's available widely. It's far more safe. Pushing vasectomy in a way that, again, is normalized as part of responsible masculinity, you know, is something that's critically important. We have a very long way to go on that.
That's a great point. Thank you. Lady,
I want to add some responsibility for healthcare providers. We haven't mentioned them very much today. I'll tell you, for example, in Sudan, many obstetricians will not do even a tubal ligation for a woman based on her own consent. They actually insist on the consent of her husband. However, the reverse is never true. You cannot say, well, she can force him or insist that he has a vasectomy. So to me, number one is we have to change the environment amongst healthcare providers for them to see that reproduction is an equal responsibility. You can't have all the burden on women and the rights on the men. And getting healthcare providers to be promoters of equity within reproduction, I think, is something very important, even from medical schools and you know, training in obstetrics, gynecology. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, sometimes you need punitive measures to get men to be responsible. In places where men are can have children and then let go of the responsibility financially, especially, they're more bound to want to have more children. They don't care. But in places where they can be forced to always be responsible for these children, even if they're divorced, even whatever they're doing, they have to pay for their children. Maybe that will help push them a little bit. Plus, of course, the norms, the social norms that we talked about earlier.
Yes, thank you. Lady, go ahead.
Yeah, this question is so important. And on chat tax, the primary topic that people and young people are talking to us about are birth control methods. And they're coming to us asking about the birth control methods that are available to them, the ones that are going to make the most sense for them, so we can refer them to care. And it is disproportionate an amount of birth control methods that are available to people who can bear children versus those that cannot. And the conversation, I think Dr. Tubio said, well, there is a responsibility across all frameworks, across all institutions, for us to talk about the options that are available, and for investment to go into those options that are not only bearing on the people who can bear children, and that it's not only their burden, right? It's an equitable process. But I think about the amount of birth control contraception pills that are available to people. Every year, new brands are coming out, again, emphasizing, underlying emphasizing that the burden is on the person who can bear children. So I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Tubia that there needs to be across all institutions, across all systems and disciplines where we're talking about this in an equitable way.
Thank you. Go ahead, Klaus.
The key thing for UNFPA as a UN body is that family planning has to be voluntary, and it has to be a choice whether you want to use it or not, whether you want children or not. The voluntariness is key. This is where, for example, vasectomies are potentially a little bit complicated because it's irreversible as a means, and it has also been used in coercive ways in the past. So we are focusing on making all kinds of contraception available. So indeed, as Lady is saying, you have the family planning method of your choice readily available. We have recently also made sure that there are, for example, different kinds of injectables where you are better able, if you're in an environment where you don't access your full rights, maybe to use injectables, because it's a more discreet kind of family planning, and that will help you in many situations if maybe your husband or your mother-in-law also has a strong opinion. So the voluntariness and then having a big range of choice and information in combination. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that the Wilson Center and the Maternal Health Initiative really tend to do is really look at the intersection of issues. And each one of you has talked about your different expertise in reproductive coercion and other forms of gender-based violence. One thing I wanted to talk about briefly is, how do you see a person's lack of power to make sexual and reproductive health choices impact other areas and other facets of their lives? I know the report talks about economic independence, community decision-making, leadership. What have you all seen in your work and research and experience on this? Like, how devastating is the impact if you don't have bodily autonomy and self-determination? Who wants to go? Lady, go ahead.
Yeah, I think reproductive choices and the power to make those choices impacts all other aspects of people's lives. If people don't have access to the tools and the information that they need to make the decisions over their body, it impacts their agency and how they show up in different spaces. Ultimately, it can impact the work that they do, the spaces they have access to, and the roles that they assume in the community and other institutions. I know that for myself and for the people that we've gotten to work with, access to reproductive health care is critical and has really determined their life. It has given them the freedom to live their fullest lives, show their most authentic selves, and really pursue what they wanted to do. In many ways, the world's not designed to help women, girls, or marginalized communities thrive. So the power to make sexual and reproductive choices is how we can dictate and how people can decide how they live those lives. It's going to increase access to education, access to different economic opportunities, that they want to have, right? That is at the core, that they choose to have. And if we're giving them that choice, I think that's critical. And reproductive choices is at the core of that.
Yes, absolutely. Unless no one else wants to jump in, we are getting to about 5 minutes left. And I have one final question for all of you panelists today before I close. And that is just, we've talked about how incredible the report was this year. And just kind of thinking ahead to 2022 and the State of the World Population Report of next year, and considering UNFPA's mandate of promoting the health, dignity, and rights of women and girls around the world, what would you hope to see included? It could be something new, but it could also be something in this report that you'd like to see more of. What would your hopes be for 2022? And just a quick 1-minute response.
Very quickly,
Go ahead, Jay.
Hopefully that we are working harder and harder to develop solutions and testing those solutions so that the report in next year and future years can include more information on what we can all do, what health systems can do, what communities can do that have been shown to be successful in increasing rights for bodily autonomy.
Wonderful, thank you.
I totally want to add my voice to Jay, because as we were developing this year's report, I kept insisting that we cannot constantly just highlight problems. We have to also highlight good work, solutions, what people are doing on the ground. Without that, it just becomes depressing, frankly. We know the problems exist, but we need to work more on highlighting good examples and solutions. However, just if I have to use one word for another future report, I would say choice. What do we mean by choice? We dealt with autonomy. I would like the report to deal with what does choice mean? And in some ways they're related to autonomy, but it may be able to give us another angle of the diversity of choice.
Wonderful, thank you. Lady.
I would want to echo what Dr. Silverman and Dr. Tubia just shared in terms of solutions and choices and what that means for people. And I would just uplift the fact that it needs to be an intersectional analysis that includes poor, disabled, trans, and many other marginalized communities that are often part of conversations and aren't included in these types of reports. So ensuring that we're still creating those spaces for them.
Great. And Klaus, to you.
Well, I'm listening very attentively, as it's obviously our team that's right now looking at what would resonate in 2021. And I think we would agree. This year we have had the clear focus on the bodily autonomy, and then we need to go to solutions. So I think that's really great. I think in that space, of course, sexuality education and family planning, would be two critical topics to bring in maybe in more detail. So we look forward to further advice and working with everyone on really getting solutions out to more people. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to all of you. We are out of time. This has been an absolute pleasure. And I know we could go on for hours talking about this report. And I hope, everyone who's watching today, you can find the report online and look at, all of the interesting stories that are detailed in it and the magnificent artwork. Yes, Klaus is holding it up. It is sensational. And a really important conversation. And I hope that all of us can continue talking about this offline and find other ways to collaborate. In case you missed any of the discussion today, the event recording will be available on the Wilson Center event page within 24 hours. And a summary of today's event will also be available soon on the .mom column of our blog, New Security Beat. So again, thank you all very, very much for being here today. And I hope you all who are here in this panel and who are watching online, enjoy the rest of your day or your evening. And that's it from me. Thank you all.